museum. The steam locomotive has almost passed from the American scene in favor of the diesel. But behind the engine, 2 out of 3 passenger cars and 1 out of 3 freight cars are today 25 years old or over. This equipment is expensive to replace. Costs have gone up, and some railroads insist that they make no money out of passenger service anymore. Last year, the railroads as a group earned less than an average 4%. One railroad president has asked, how can you renew equipment on a railroad that earns less than 4% when you have to borrow the money at 5.5%? One great early American railroad builder, James J. Hill, once said, a railroad is in partnership with the land upon which we live and walk. It will prosper only when the land or its owners prosper. The condition of equipment, old and new, has a great deal to do with whether a railroad prospers or does not. The first part of the story of American railroads, then, is old equipment and loss of passenger service. Part of the trouble dates from the last war. From Pearl Harbor on, American railroads carried 90% of all military supplies and equipment, 97% of the troops. No bomb fell on any American train during the war. Not a foot of track was blown up, but the railroads had stretched their resources to the limit and paid the price after the war in worn-out and battered equipment. And then came new competition. The rails were no longer the only highway for American transportation. The family motor car, 54 millions of them. The bus, carrying 285 million passengers a year. The aeroplane, carrying 41 million passengers a year. In the post-war years, even the planes were beginning to move into the freight-carrying field. Trucks began carrying freight long haul and, even more important, short convenient hauls. The barges traveling the inland waterways were getting more and more business. And then there was something new on the American scene. Pipelines were carrying natural gas and oil from one part of the country to another. Texas was joined to New York, a distance of 1,300 miles, by a natural gas pipeline known as the Big Inch. This was such formidable competition that some railroads began laying their own pipelines along their own rights of way. In the last 25 years, the drop in railroad passenger travel and freight carriage between cities has been substantial. Nevertheless, it is also true that the tonnage carried by the railroads since the war has improved steadily. In fact, they're carrying more freight today than all forms of transportation carried in 1939. Although these forms of transportation have had a larger share of the post-war boom than have had the railroads. Part of the trouble is due to government regulations. H. Vaughan is an executive of the Pennsylvania Railroad. He expressed these views.
Quite frankly,
Mr. Vaughan and other railroad executives complain of being forced to run uneconomic services, chief of which is the commuting business, the business of carrying suburbanites to and from their place of work. 1 out of every 2 train passengers is a commuter, yet the commuters account for less than 13% of the total passenger revenue. On some passenger trains, everything is done to pamper the passenger. First-class trains carry the conveniences of a hotel, and passengers expect it. But the railroads insist that they lose money on their first-class service. Most railroad men are encouraging second-class travel, which is much more economical to operate. Many of them think in terms of serving light, pre-cooked meals at your seat, airline fashion, and there are some of them who would like to do away with the dining car entirely.
The dining car is typical of the dining car service, which is one of the stellar attractions of railroad travel. It is a symbol of the dining car service created by the railroad industry for advertising purposes. It is the dining car service which experienced travelers seek out to assure comfortable, leisurely travel. In the light of this, it is strange that some railroads are trying to make the dining car another vanishing American. Dining cars should not and cannot be a tool which must pay for itself. The dining car cannot be done away with. It is firmly entrenched in the American seed and deeply rooted in the American railroad tradition.
The problems of the men who run the railroads and the men who work on them are many. There is the question of terminals and stations and the accommodation and service to passengers. There is the costly maintenance of right-of-way, that area of land running on both sides of the tracks themselves. Today, railroad costs are high, and railroads pay their own way down to every last spike. They're starting from the bottom at the roadbed. They're using welded rail today, joining short lengths into solid sections, a quarter of a mile long. This cuts maintenance costs and makes for a smoother ride. They are starting at the bottom inside the railroad station, at the ticket counter. In New York's Pennsylvania station, busiest in the country, electronics and the largest closed-circuit television installation give speedier service to the customer who wants a reservation for a coach seat, a Pullman chair, or sleeping car space. On a busy holiday, this counter makes 17,000 reservations and saves each customer 6 minutes of time. The railroads want enough riders back to make trains profitable again. They also believe that they will not get freight, the profitable end of the business, unless they have passengers first. The railroads are fighting to get the passengers back, and their tools are television, electronic controls, facsimile transmitters, facsimile transceivers, and automatic ticket printers. The job, which once took 8 minutes, now takes 2 minutes. Steam is now a curiosity on American rails. The diesel has taken over. It's a question of economy, a saving to the railroads of at least $1 billion a year. But every old-time railroad man mourns the passing of steam and dislikes the diesel's blaring horn. Behind the powerful diesel with its multiple units, the railroads are building a new train. Into the trains, they're putting modern design, new metals, new materials, new methods. There is no one single modernization program in this country. There are as many as there are major railroads, 112. This is the Pennsylvania Railroad's experimental lightweight car, Pioneer III. And the New Haven Railroad's self-powered cars, which make it possible to split a train into sections for spur line service. And General Motors Aerotrain, built for 1/3 of the cost of a standard train. And this is the Santa Fe's high-level El Capitan. For 120 years, the floor of every car, passenger or freight in the United States, measured 4 feet and 3 inches exactly above the rails. This was the height of the freight platform from which the first bale of cotton was unloaded in 1830. Now at last, the rule is broken. This is the Pennsylvania's new low-level tubular train, the Keystone. And the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Zephyr. This is the New Haven's Talgo Train. The Talgo is hitting 103 miles an hour. Since the war, the railroads have spent $12 billion, mostly on equipment. In the next 10 years, they will double it.
passengers.
Question of economics. It is cheaper for a trucker to ship his trailer from Chicago to New York by train than it is for him to drive it there. The system began on the New Haven Railroad, and it was nicknamed a piggyback. Today, it is the railroad's fastest growing source of freight business. The Pennsylvania sends 2 truck trains a day from Chicago to New York via Pittsburgh on passenger train schedules.
That's me and my tractor coming off the flat car right now. My name's Mike Devlin, and I'm a piggyback trucker. These are 25-tonners they're loading now, and they're jacking them tight. You know, some yards I just drop my trailer at the front door, and the yard's own two-wheeler takes her away. You see, he's got a cab he can ride backwards and forwards, and even sometimes sideways, like a crab. No matter how the cars lay on the switches, he can load them. You know, you gotta respect these railroad guys. They got safety on the brain, and how? You see, they cable and block up those trucks so you'd think they was on their way to Mars instead of Pittsburgh. And after one guy gets through inspecting, another guy inspects. And when he's through, still another guy checks him. And only when everybody is satisfied does that baby start to roll. Now, from Pittsburgh to New York's about 400 miles. I made the trip thousands of times myself. Well, maybe hundreds. And it's as traffic jammed to 400 miles as you ever want to crawling along in low gear, because these babies are hard to push. Now, on the other end, there's a guy just like me. You see, I put him on, and he takes him off. And a single rig like mine can handle maybe 18, 19, 25 tonners a day. Maybe more. It depends on the length of the city run. You know, it's a smart angle for both the railroads and the truckers. They save equipment, they save time, and they make money. And they keep the customers happy, because now we can do a real door-to-door delivery. Simple as ABC. Those doors, though, sometimes are hard to make.
Reclaiming a strip of marshland along the Ohio River, the Pennsylvania built the largest and most modern push-button freight classification or marshalling yard that there is. From one end to the other, Conway Yard is 4 miles long. It is 1,000 yards wide. It contains 165 miles of track. What you're about to see in operation is the largest automatic freight yard in the United States. A handful of men do the job many times their number did before. This is electronics. This is automation in railroads.
What's he going around?
The engine, when he comes back up off the hill, go around the 200 track on EP2.
The car inspector's going to get on CE2 right away.
I'll be on it as soon as I get that engine off. I told the man back there to cut that engine off and get him right out of there.
Okay, ordered 6:30 p.m. order on CE2.
That'll be good.
No help on gauze, no help on hoppers.
All right, you need CE2's inbound power.
No power at all to relay.
The yard handles freight trains very much the way the dealer handles a pack of cards. The incoming trains are the old hands thrown into the center of the table. The yard gathers them up, shuffles them, and deals them out fresh. One of the men who knows
here at West Conway. Before its arrival, we get information of all the cars in the train, what they carry, and where they are bound for. When the train arrives, the scanner starts his check.
B&LE 2033 a gone. B&O 329016 a box. C&NJ 63568 a flat. 12622 a box. 11303 a gone. NP 25579 a box. WECX 129 a tank. IC 25580.
How should the cars of the incoming train be rearranged?
CB and Q.
The machine answers the questions. The machine gives the order. 1 to the eastbound hump conductor. Another to the eastbound retarder operator. And another copy for the General Yardmaster. We push the cars up over the hump where they are cut off. Sometimes they come down in single car cuts, sometimes they come down in 2s and 3s. The hump conductor sends the first car to one of 54 tracks by pressing a button. All the switches line up ahead of it. Electronic circuits decide how fast a freight car should go down into the hump. Electronic circuits apply the brakes. But whenever he decides to, the retarder operator can interfere and apply a little extra braking power himself. Before we had electronic retarders, every car had a brakeman riding it down the hump, deciding as he went how fast to let his car roll. Now, instead of hundreds of brakemen, electronic equipment. The new freight is ready. This train does not, of course, carry all the cars of the old train. It carries some of them. The rest will follow shortly in other freight trains. Conway Yard processes 4 to 5 cars a minute, 2,500 to 3,000 cars on each 8-hour shift, or the equivalent of 60 maximum length freight trains a day, each one 1.25 miles long.
The efficiency of is the biggest fully automatic freight yard anywhere. It may not be tomorrow. More are on the drawing boards. In operating economies alone, Conway Yard will repay its $34 million investment in under 4 years. The savings to the country as a whole are even larger. Because of Conway Yard and of developments like it, railroad men do look to the future with hope. Now, there's one more point to make before to conclude our railroad story. This is a pamphlet written by